Why do avoidants disrespect you? This question often strikes the heart like lightning when someone ignores you, cuts off your words, or makes your presence feel irrelevant. Of course, it wounds deeply. But does this happen by chance? No, it is a conscious or often unconscious strategy of the avoidant. They do not do this because you lack worth, but because they themselves are losing the battle within. When they mock you, dismiss your emotions, or belittle your presence, they are in fact trying to conceal their own inner weakness. The philosopher Nietzsche once said, "Man lowers others only to support his broken ego." That is precisely the truth reflected in the avoidance behavior. Behind their disrespect lies a hunger for power, a burden of shame, and a fear of closeness. Sartre wrote, "Hell is not other people, but the mirror they hold up to us." For the avoidant, closeness itself becomes hell because intimacy forces them to confront their true fragility. This is why they turn love into a prison and respect into a weakness. But here lies the real question. What does this disrespect actually mean? Is it really a judgment of your worth? No, it is a declaration of their own emptiness. Today, we will uncover these reasons. We will explore what avoidants are truly saying when they disrespect you, what psychological mechanisms lie behind their actions, and what this behavior actually signifies. This journey will take us deep into their psychology, where power, shame, fear, and ego intertwine to create a pattern of behavior that appears like an attack on you, but is in truth the desperate cry of their own wounded existence. Power and control. When avoidants disrespect you, at first glance, it may seem like just a casual behavior, maybe a sarcastic remark, ignoring what you said, or suddenly turning cold. But beneath this surface, there's always a deeper agenda, the need to maintain power and control in the relationship. Avoidants live with a constant fear that if they value their partner too much, their own control will slip away. They refuse to acknowledge that closeness and respect can also be forms of strength. Instead, they weaponize disrespect as a way to keep themselves on top. When an avoidant cuts off your words, dismisses your emotional needs, or belittles your presence, the hidden message is, "I am in control. This relationship will run on my terms." But this isn't real power. It's insecurity disguised as dominance. As the philosopher Machiavelli once pointed out, weak people often use cruelty to give the illusion of strength. The avoidant does exactly this. The more insecure they are, the more disrespectful their behavior becomes. This disrespect is also a kind of test. The avoidant wants to see, if I give you the cold treatment, will you still stay? If I devalue you, will you remain silent? If I trivialize your feelings, will you tolerate it? And if you do tolerate it, the avoidant convinces themselves that they truly hold control. The cycle then repeats, strengthening the illusion that they are in charge. But here's the truth. This so-called control is nothing more than an illusion. Deep inside, the avoidant is terrified that intimacy will expose their vulnerabilities. Disrespect becomes their wall, a barrier they believe protects them. Yet this wall doesn't just wound the other person. It traps the avoidant in emotional isolation. They think they are winning because they've managed to maintain distance. But in reality, they are losing the very battle they're trying to fight, the battle to connect without fear. In this game of power and control, the avoidant forgets that real strength doesn't come from dominance. It comes from connection. Respect is not gained by withholding it, but by giving it. Yet because the avoidant refuses to confront their own fear and fragility, they hide behind disrespect as a protective mask. Disrespect is not true strength, it's only the shadow of inner insecurity. When the avoidant tries to diminish you, they are not reducing your worth. They are propping up their broken self. What looks like an attack on you is in reality a loud confession of their own weakness. Projection of inner shame. If we look closer at the psychology of avoidance, we find that disrespect is not only about control, it is also about shame. Deep inside, many avoidants carry a heavy burden of inadequacy. They live with an internal voice that whispers, "You are not enough." But because facing this voice directly feels unbearable, they look for a way to push it outward. That's where projection comes in. By demeaning others, they temporarily silence the torment inside themselves. When an avoidant dismisses your feelings, criticizes the way you speak, or highlights your flaws in a cold, cutting manner, it isn't really about you. It is a mirror of their own inner struggle. Instead of acknowledging their private wounds, they project them onto you. The philosopher Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." For the avoidant, this truth is flipped. Everything they hate about themselves, they begin to see in you. Belittling you is their way of escaping their own reflection. This mechanism works like a defense shield. The avoidant may feel a surge of relief when they tell you that you are too emotional, too needy, or not good enough. For a brief moment, the weight of their inner shame feels lighter because it's no longer theirs. It has been dumped onto you. But this relief doesn't last. Shame, unlike anger, doesn't dissolve when projected, it rebounds. The avoidant is caught in a cycle where the more they criticize, the more disconnected they feel, and the more their shame grows. Notice how their disrespect often comes in the form of sharp judgment rather than neutral indifference. This is the giveaway. Judgment is rarely about truth. It is about displacement. The harsher the words, the deeper the shame behind them. Like a person trying to extinguish fire by throwing sparks outward, they set the relationship ablaze with negativity while hoping their own house won't burn. The tragedy here is that projection never cures shame. It only multiplies it. The avoidant thinks they are lightening their burden, but in truth, they are reinforcing it. Every time they call you not enough, their own sense of inadequacy tightens its grip. They become prisoners of their self-loathing, chained by the very disrespect they cast upon others. This is why an avoidant's disrespect feels so personal. Even though it is not, it cuts deep because it is designed to transfer pain. Yet the pain they try to export is not yours to carry. It belongs to them. When avoidants try to convince you that you are lacking, they are revealing the rawest truth about themselves. Their disrespect is not a verdict on your value. It is an echo of the shame they cannot face within. Fear of dependency. One of the hidden truths behind avoidant behavior is their deep fear of dependency. In their minds, the belief takes root that if they value someone or reveal their vulnerability, they will become weak. To them, weakness equals reliance on another person, and that thought shakes them to the core. This is why they often choose to act disrespectful. It becomes a way of deceiving themselves. By doing this, they try to convince their hearts that I don't need you, but where does this fear come from? Most avoidants have lived through experiences where attachment brought them pain. Past wounds taught them that closeness is dangerous. So when they enter a new relationship, this fear resurfaces. If I give this person importance, they might become essential to me, and if they become essential, I will lose my freedom. To avoid this inner terror, they turn to sarcasm, coldness, or dismissive words. Disrespect becomes their weapon. It gives them the illusion of power and independence. The more they ignore you, the more they belittle your feelings, the more they reassure themselves that they are not dependent on anyone. But this freedom is not real. It is a mask. In truth, the louder they proclaim, I don't need you, the more entangled they are in their fear of needing you. The philosopher Erich Fromm once said, man's greatest conflict is that he longs for freedom yet fears loneliness. The avoidant is trapped exactly in this paradox. They crave independence, but cannot bear the terror of losing a bond. The outcome is a false wall of disrespect built to keep you at a distance so they can feel safe. To the partner, this behavior feels like a personal insult. Yet in reality, it is not about their worth. It is about the avoidance defense mechanism. They do not see closeness as comfort. They interpret it as confinement. By making you feel small, they implant the thought in their own minds. If this person is irrelevant, then I am free. The tragedy is that this form of self-protection is only an illusion. The more they belittle, the more isolated and empty they become inside. They use disrespect to avoid dependency, but even after disrespecting, they are never truly free of the fear. They are merely deceiving themselves for a moment. An avoidance disrespect is not a judgment of your value, it is a reflection of their fear. They avoid giving you importance, not because you are unworthy, but because they are terrified of becoming dependent. Their behavior is self-protection, not a denial of your worth. Boundary testing. One of the most overlooked dynamics in avoidant behavior is boundary testing. Unlike random coldness or occasional rudeness, this is a deliberate psychological experiment they run, often without admitting it to themselves. They push limits, cross lines, and use disrespectful remarks as probes to measure your endurance. For the avoidant, every sarcastic comment, dismissive shrug, or act of belittling is a silent question. Will you accept this, or will you walk away? Why do they do this? At the root lies an insecurity wrapped in control. Avoidants are haunted by the fear of abandonment, yet they dread closeness at the same time. This paradox fuels their need to test. By provoking you, they seek to discover whether your love is fragile or resilient. If you stay silent when they belittle you, they interpret it as proof that they hold power. If you protest, but still remain, they conclude that your boundaries can be bent. Each time you absorb the disrespect, you unknowingly teach them that mistreatment has no cost. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once remarked, "The self is the relation that relates itself to its own limits." Avoidants embody this tension. They cannot define safety without first testing the threshold of the other person. Disrespect becomes their tool of exploration, an unkind yet calculated way of asking, "How much of me in my rawest form can you take?" For them, this isn't only about you, it is about their fragile sense of identity. They fear that if someone values them unconditionally, it could expose the truth they hide, that they are not as strong as they pretend. So they push, prod, and provoke to see if your loyalty can coexist with their flaws. Unfortunately, this testing often becomes toxic because the longer you tolerate it, the harsher it grows. This is not love's test, it is fear's game. When an avoidant laughs at your pain, mocks your needs, or withdraws affection without explanation, they are constructing scenarios to measure your breaking point. In their logic, if you survive the disrespect, then you are safe to keep around because they can rely on your tolerance. But if you resist and create firm boundaries, they feel threatened. Yet paradoxically, they also begin to respect you more. The irony here is sharp. What feels like cruelty to you is in their world a twisted form of reassurance. They think, if this person doesn't leave me even when I mistreat them, maybe I am not as disposable as I fear. But this comes at the price of your dignity. Their testing is not a reflection of your weakness, but of their inability to trust without proof. When avoidants disrespect you as a test, it is not because you deserve belittlement, it is because they are trying to measure your tolerance. If you accept it, they escalate. If you draw a firm line, you challenge their fear. The key to breaking the cycle lies not in absorbing the test, but in refusing to play it. Emotional overwhelm. For avoidance, emotional intimacy is not a safe harbor. It often feels like suffocation, what others interpret as love, warmth, or connection. An avoidant can experience as pressure and entrapment. When closeness intensifies, their internal alarms begin to ring. The very thing most people crave, shared vulnerability, deep conversation, or consistent affection, becomes for them an unbearable weight pressing against their fragile defenses. At that point, their instinctive response is not to lean in, but to retreat. They do this through subtle yet sharp forms of disrespect. Sarcasm that undercuts your feelings, dismissive gestures that reduce your words to nothing, or outright rudeness that pushes you away. Each act is less about hostility and more about survival. They are overwhelmed not by you, but by the emotions. Closeness awakens in them. In their world, your tenderness feels like a storm they cannot control. So they raise walls of coldness to protect their inner calm. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." For avoidance, freedom often means escaping the gravitational pull of intimacy. The closer someone gets, the more their autonomy feels threatened. Disrespect in this sense becomes a desperate attempt to carve out breathing space. It is not that they hate closeness entirely, rather it is that too much closeness floods their system, leaving them gasping for emotional oxygen. This overwhelm often stems from early experiences where attachment was unsafe, inconsistent, or conditional. Love was not soothing but intrusive, not gentle but overwhelming. So now, as adults, when genuine intimacy approaches, the avoidant psyche confuses it with danger. The body reacts with anxiety. The mind scrambles for escape, and the easiest tool at hand is distancing behavior. Sarcasm, cold indifference, or criticism all serve as shields against the tidal wave of emotional demands they believe might drown them. But here lies the tragedy. In trying to preserve their sense of independence, they destroy the very connection they secretly long for. Their disrespect is not a declaration of your inadequacy, but a reflection of their panic. When they roll their eyes at your vulnerability or belittle your efforts to connect, they are really saying, "I cannot handle the depth of this closeness right now." The paradox is that the more you chase them in these moments, the harsher their disrespect becomes because they feel cornered. Yet, if you step back, they often calm down, though the cycle repeats itself again and again. Emotional overwhelm makes avoidance disrespectful, not because you are unworthy, but because intimacy feels like drowning to them. Their sarcasm and coldness are not signs of strength, but raw signals of their inability to stay present when closeness becomes too intense. What you are witnessing is not rejection of your value, it is evidence of their struggle to breathe in the atmosphere of intimacy. Emotional distance creation. Avoidants often perceive intimacy not as a gift, but as a threat that erodes their sense of safety. To them, closeness is a force that gradually chips away at their boundaries, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. In order to shield themselves, they resort to a method that feels both simple and effective, creating distance through coldness and disrespect. Rather than confront their inner discomfort directly, they construct walls of detachment, using dismissive behavior and emotional withdrawal as bricks in that wall. Disrespect in this framework becomes more than an action, it becomes a strategy. By speaking harshly, ignoring affection, or acting indifferent, they send an unspoken message: do not come closer. This behavior is rarely about the other person's value, and more about the avoidant's fragile need for control. To them, building emotional distance feels like constructing a fortress where they cannot be touched, judged, or consumed by the weight of another's expectations. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once compared human intimacy to porcupines seeking warmth. They huddle together for comfort, but prick one another with their quills, forcing them apart. For avoidance, every gesture of closeness feels like a sharp quill. The safest response, therefore, is to step back. Their disrespect becomes the prick they use to push you away, ensuring that they are not swallowed by the very warmth they crave. At the core of this behavior lies fear. Fear of exposure, fear of dependency, fear of losing autonomy. They often equate love with entrapment and respect with surrender. So by choosing coldness, they believe they are preserving their independence. When they minimize your feelings or mock your emotional needs, it is not because they see you as worthless, but because they see intimacy as dangerous terrain. Yet this self-protective strategy comes at a heavy cost. The more distance they create, the lonelier they become. Their fortress, while sturdy, also keeps out the comfort of genuine connection. Over time, the walls that once offered safety turn into barriers of isolation. In trying to keep themselves safe, they inadvertently sabotage the very relationships that could have offered healing. From the outside, this coldness can feel cruel and heartless, but underneath it is simply survival. The avoidant uses disrespect as camouflage for fragility. Every dismissive laugh, every eye roll, every calculated silence is an armor plate hammered onto their emotional body. The irony is that while this shield protects them from intimacy's intensity, it simultaneously confirms their deepest fear that they are alone and misunderstood. Emotional distance creation is not a reflection of your lack of worth, but of their desperate attempt to maintain control in the face of intimacy. Disrespect for them is not about dominance over you, but about survival within themselves. It is their way of ensuring they do not dissolve into vulnerability. What you perceive as rejection is in truth a declaration of their fear. Their coldness is not an assessment of your value, it is the language of their defense. When avoidants disrespect you, it is natural to feel wounded, silenced, or devalued. Yet the truth hidden beneath their behavior is far more revealing. It says little about your worth and everything about their inner battles. Their sarcasm, coldness, or belittling remarks are not declarations of superiority, but confessions of fear, shame, and fragility. For them, disrespect serves multiple functions. It creates a sense of control, masks their insecurities, projects their hidden shame, and builds distance when emotions feel overwhelming. Each act of dismissal is less about you and more about their desperate attempt to protect themselves from the intimacy they simultaneously crave and fear. In this paradox lies the tragedy. They long for closeness, yet the very strategies they use to stay safe ensure their loneliness, power, shame, fear of dependency, boundary testing, and emotional overwhelm all converge into a defense system where disrespect becomes armor. But armor that blocks connection eventually turns into a cage. The avoidant may believe they are protecting their independence, but in reality, they are imprisoning themselves in isolation. So when faced with avoidant disrespect, the question is not, am I unworthy? But rather, what is this person hiding from within themselves? Their coldness is not your reflection, it is their survival script. Their mockery is not a measure of your value. It is a mirror of their shame. The deeper truth is liberating. Disrespect is never about your insufficiency. It is the avoidant's unspoken cry for safety, control, and distance. Recognizing this does not erase the pain, but it shifts the perspective. You stop carrying their burden as your own. You see clearly their behavior does not define you. It defines the walls they cannot yet bring themselves to tear down.